The massive doors of the High Council chamber opened with a sound like thunder. Captain Jake Morrison walked through them with his head held high, his military boots clicking against the crystal floor. Behind him followed Admiral Lisa Carter and 3 other human representatives. The chamber was enormous, with walls that seemed to stretch up forever into darkness. Hundreds of alien beings sat in curved rows, their strange eyes all focused on the small group of humans walking toward. The center platform. Jake had been to this place before, but today felt different. Today the air hummed with tension and barely hidden hostility. The Zephyrians sat in their usual places, their crystalline skin catching the light and throwing rainbow patterns across the walls. Their leader, Chancellor Vextar, stood at the highest point of the chamber. His body glowed with soft blue patterns that Jake knew meant displeasure. To the left sat the representatives of the Hive Mind Collective. 20 insectoid creatures that moved as one, their clicking mandibles creating a constant background noise. Jake had never liked dealing with them. It was impossible to negotiate with beings who shared a single consciousness. They either agreed completely or disagreed completely, with no room for compromise. The other species present were mostly observers. The peaceful Altarians, with their large eyes and gentle manner, sat quietly in the back rows. The warlike Korgan delegation looked bored, their massive frames shifting restlessly in seats too small for them. A dozen other alien races filled the remaining spaces, all members of the Galactic Confederation. Admiral Carter moved to stand beside Jake on the platform. She was in her 50s now, with gray streaking her brown hair, but her back was straight, and her eyes were sharp. She had been Earth's representative to the Confederation for 12 years, and she knew how these proceedings worked. The aliens would present their case with great ceremony, offer humanity a chance to respond, and then deliver their predetermined judgment. Chancellor Vextar began to speak, his words translated by the devices worn by all present. His voice had a musical quality that humans found pleasant, but Jake could hear the cold anger underneath the melody. The Chancellor spoke of humanity's expansion beyond their assigned territories, of their refusal to follow proper Confederation protocols for colonial development, and of their persistent tendency to act independently rather than seeking approval from galactic authorities. The species known as humanity has repeatedly demonstrated behavior inconsistent with civilized galactic society, the Chancellor said. His crystalline face could not show expression as humans understood it, but the pulsing lights beneath his skin grew brighter with each word. They terraform worlds without environmental impact studies. They establish trade relationships without proper oversight. They maintain separate governmental systems instead of unifying under-species leadership, as required by Confederation law. Jake listened to the familiar accusations. Every charge was technically true, but the Chancellor made them sound like crimes against nature. Humans did terraform worlds quickly, but they had never damaged an ecosystem. They did establish independent trade, but they had lifted dozens of species out of poverty in the process. They did maintain their old national boundaries, but those differences in culture and government had led to innovations that benefited everyone. The Chancellor continued his speech, listing every instance where humanity had bent or broken Confederation rules. The list was long and detailed. Jake realized that the aliens had been watching and recording human activities for years, building a case for this moment. This was not a trial. This was a sentencing. When the Chancellor finished speaking, Admiral Carter stepped forward. The chamber fell silent, except for the clicking of the Hive Mind Collective. She looked up at the assembled aliens, her voice clear and strong when she spoke. "Honored members of the Confederation," she began, "humanity acknowledges that we have not always followed traditional protocols. We acknowledge that our methods differ from those established by older civilizations. But we reject the implication that our differences make us unsuitable for galactic society. She paused, looking around. The chamber. Some of the aliens were listening with apparent interest. Others, particularly the Zephyrians and the hive mind representatives, seemed to have already made up their minds. Humans have contributed to galactic prosperity, Carter continued. Our medical advances have extended lifespans for dozens of species. Our agricultural techniques have ended famines on 17 worlds. Our engineering innovations have improved space travel efficiency by 30% across all Confederation fleets. We have never attacked another member species or violated their sovereign territory. The Admiral's words echoed in the vast chamber, but Jake could see they were falling on deaf ears. The Zephyrians' light patterns showed polite attention, but no change in their position. The Hive Mind Collective had probably decided humanity's fate before the proceedings even began. Chancellor Vexstar raised one crystalline hand, and Admiral Carter fell silent. The moment Jake had been dreading arrived, as the Chancellor prepared to deliver the Confederation's judgment. The High Council has considered all evidence and testimony, the Chancellor announced, while humanity's contributions to galactic society are acknowledged. Their persistent refusal to conform to established standards of civilized behavior cannot be overlooked. Humanity represents a destabilizing influence that threatens the peace and order that has existed for millennia. Jake felt his heart sink, but he kept his expression neutral. Around the chamber, he could see some aliens nodding in agreement, while others looked uncomfortable with what was happening. Therefore, the Chancellor continued, by unanimous decision of the voting members, humanity is hereby expelled from the Galactic Confederation. All human colonies beyond the Sol system must be evacuated within 1 standard year. All human vessels must depart Confederation space within the same time frame. Humanity will be restricted to their home system and denied access to galactic trade, routes, hyperspace beacons, and advanced technologies. The words hit Jake like physical blows. 43 human colonies would have to be abandoned, leaving behind infrastructure worth trillions of credits and displacing over 14 million people. Thousands of human businesses operating throughout Confederation space would be forced to close. Worst of all, humanity would be cut off from the scientific and cultural exchange that had driven their rapid advancement over the past 2 centuries. But the Chancellor was not finished. Humanity may petition for readmission to the Confederation after a period of 500 standard years, provided they demonstrate proper evolution toward civilized standards of behavior and governance. 500 years. Jake almost laughed at the absurdity. The aliens were essentially telling humanity to change everything about themselves and then wait 20 generations for the privilege of asking to rejoin Dot as the formal proceedings concluded. The various alien delegations began filing out of the chamber. Some looked satisfied with the outcome, others appeared troubled, but none made any move to speak with the human representatives. Within minutes, Jake and his companions found themselves alone in the vast empty space. Admiral Carter turned to Jake, her face grim but determined. "Well, Captain," she said quietly, "looks like we're on our own." Jake nodded, his mind already turning to the enormous task ahead. 14 million people would need to be evacuated and resettled. Decades of colonial development would have to be abandoned. Humanity would be cut off from technologies they had come to depend on and forced to survive on their own resources. But as he looked at Admiral Carter's resolute expression, Jake felt something unexpected stirring in his chest. Not despair, but anger. Not fear, but determination. The aliens thought they were punishing humanity by forcing them into isolation. They thought cutting humans off from galactic society would teach them humility and force them to conform. Jake suspected they were about to learn how wrong they were. Humans had always done their best work when their backs were against the wall. Now they would have the chance to prove just how resourceful they could be when left to their own devices. The walk back to their shuttle felt different than the walk in. Jake's steps were lighter, his shoulders straighter. Behind him, Admiral Carter was already talking quietly into her communicator, beginning the process of organizing humanity's response to Exiled as their shuttle lifted off from the crystal spires. Of Zephyria Prime, Jake looked back one last time at the seat of galactic power. The aliens thought they had seen the last of humanity as a force in galactic affairs. He smiled grimly and settled back in his seat. They had no idea what they had. Just unleashed. 6 months had passed since the verdict, and Commander Ryan Brooks stood on the observation deck of New Olympus Station, watching the systematic dismantling of humanity's crown jewel colony. Below him, thousands of workers moved like ants across the surface of the planet, carefully removing every piece of equipment, every structure, every trace of human presence that could be salvaged. The work proceeded with typical human efficiency despite the heartbreak involved. Ryan had been born on New Olympus 32 years ago. This world had been his home, and watching it being stripped bare felt like watching his childhood memories being erased one building at a time. But orders were orders, and Admiral Carter had been clear. Humanity would not leave anything useful behind for the aliens to claim. Every fusion reactor, every atmospheric processor, every piece of advanced machinery would be loaded onto the evacuation ships and taken back to Sol System. If the Confederation wanted humanity gone, they would get their wish, but they would not profit from it. "Commander," a voice called from behind him. Ryan turned to see Dr. Elena Rodriguez approaching, her dark hair tied back and her clothes dusty from fieldwork. She carried a sealed container in her hands and looked more excited than anyone had a right to be during an evacuation. "What have you found now, Doctor?" Ryan asked. Elena had been the colony's chief archaeologist before the exile order came down. Even now, with the evacuation deadline looming, she continued exploring the ancient ruins that dotted New Olympus's northern continent. "Something extraordinary," Elena said, setting the container down carefully. "Ryan, I think we need to contact Admiral Carter immediately. This changes everything." Ryan raised an eyebrow. Elena was not given to exaggeration, and the excitement in her voice was genuine. "Show me," he said. Elena opened the container and removed what looked like a crystalline device about the size of a human hand. It pulsed with a soft inner light that seemed to shift through colors that had no names. The surface was covered with intricate patterns that hurt to look at directly, as if they existed in more dimensions than human eyes could process. "I found this in the deepest chamber of the ruins in Sector 7, Elena explained. "Ryan, these ruins are old, really old. Carbon dating puts them at over 3 million years, which predates every known galactic civilization by millennia." Ryan stared at the device. He was no scientist, but even he could tell there was something special about it. The way it seemed to bend light around itself, the way it made his skin tingle when he got too close, the way it seemed to whisper at the edge of hearing. "Have you tested it?" he asked. "Preliminary scans only," Elena replied. "But Ryan, the energy readings are off the charts. This thing is still active after 3 million years. The technology is completely unknown. It doesn't match anything in Confederation databases." Ryan's mind raced. If Elena was right, this discovery could be worth more than everything else they were salvaging combined. Ancient technology was the holy grail of galactic archaeology. Wars had been fought over finds far less significant than this. "How many more are there?" he asked. Elena's smile widened. 17 so far, and we've barely scratched the surface. "Ryan, I think we've found an entire cache of pre-Confederation technology. The aliens don't know it exists because they never bothered to properly survey the ruins. They were too focused on the mineral deposits." Ryan grabbed his communicator and opened a secure channel to Admiral Carter. The conversation was brief and cryptic, but the Admiral's response was immediate. She would arrive on New Olympus within 48 hours with a specialized team. Meanwhile, on Earth, President Nathan Clark faced problems of his own. The capital city was in chaos as evacuation ships arrived daily, bringing displaced colonists who had nowhere to go. The government had set up processing centers in every major city, but they were overwhelmed. 14 million people could not be resettled overnight, especially when Earth's economy was collapsing under the strain of losing galactic trade. Nathan stood in his office, watching news feeds from around the world. Riots had broken out in New York and London as frustrated colonists clashed with local populations who saw them as a burden. In Asia, entire cities were being converted into temporary housing, but it was not enough. The infrastructure simply could not handle the sudden influx of people. But beneath the surface chaos, something remarkable was happening. Human ingenuity was rising to meet the challenge. In Mumbai, engineers were designing new housing complexes that could be built in weeks rather than months. In Snow Paulo, agricultural scientists were developing ways to increase food production using techniques learned from the colonies. In Lagos, manufacturers were retooling their factories to produce goods that had previously been imported from other star systems. The crisis was forcing humanity to become self-sufficient in ways they had not been for 2 centuries. It was painful, but it was also revealing capabilities that had been dormant during the comfortable years of galactic membership. In the Vega system, Captain Amy Foster commanded the evacuation of the mining colonies. These were not the comfortable worlds like New Olympus, but rough industrial outposts where humans extracted rare minerals for galactic markets. The miners were a tough breed, and they were not taking the evacuation well. "Captain," her navigation officer called out, "we're getting some strange readings from the hyperspace beacons." Amy moved to the navigation console and studied the displays. The beacons were alien technology, placed throughout the galaxy to help ships navigate hyperspace safely. Human vessels had always depended on them for long-distance travel. "What kind of strange readings?" she asked. "It looks like the beacons are broadcasting on frequencies we've never detected before," the officer explained. "Almost like they're communicating with each other, sharing information about ship movements." Amy felt a chill run down her spine. If the beacons were monitoring human ship movements, it meant the aliens had been tracking them far more closely than anyone had realized. It also meant that humanity's navigation data was incomplete. The aliens had been showing them only approved routes, keeping the best hyperspace lanes for themselves. "Start recording everything," Amy ordered. "I want full spectrum analysis of all beacon transmissions, and get me a mapping team. If we're going to be cut off from the beacon network, we need to know what we're missing." Over the following weeks, Amy's team made a startling discovery. The hyperspace routes shown to humanity represented less than 30% of the actual navigable pathways. The aliens had been deliberately limiting human expansion by hiding the existence of faster, more efficient routes through space-time. The revelation was both infuriating and liberating. Infuriating because it showed the depth of alien deception. Liberating because it meant humanity was not as dependent on alien infrastructure as they had believed. As the evacuation deadline approached, the last human ships prepared to leave Confederation space. But they were not departing as broken refugees. They carried with them advanced technology reverse-engineered from the New Olympus artifacts, detailed maps of hidden hyperspace routes, and most importantly, a burning determination to prove their worth. Admiral Carter stood on the bridge of her flagship, watching the final transport convoys form up for the journey home. Behind them lay 2 centuries of human presence in galactic society. Ahead lay uncertainty, but also opportunity. "Admiral," her communications officer reported, "all evacuation fleets are ready for departure. 14.2 million civilians. successfully evacuated. All major infrastructure and technology salvaged. And the special cargo from New Olympus? Carter asked. Secured in the research vessels, ma'am. Dr. Rodriguez's team is already beginning preliminary analysis during the journey. Carter nodded. The aliens thought they were sending humanity home in defeat. They thought cutting humans off from galactic civilization would humble them and eventually force them to conform to Confederation standards. They had no idea that they had just given humanity the greatest gift possible, the freedom to develop without interference, armed with ancient technology that predated galactic civilization and knowledge of hyperspace routes that the aliens thought were secret. Signal all ships, Carter ordered. We're going home. But we're not going home to hide. We're going home to build something the galaxy has never seen before. The human fleet jumped to hyperspace, leaving Confederation space behind. But this was not an ending. It was a beginning. In forcing humanity into exile, the aliens had unknowingly created the conditions for something extraordinary to emerge. As the stars streaked past the viewports, Carter allowed herself a small smile. The Confederation had wanted to get rid of a troublesome species that refused to follow the rules. Instead, they had just set humanity free to write their own rules. And the galaxy would never be the same. 3 years had passed since humanity's return to the Sol System, and Dr. Marcus Webb stood before the most complex piece of technology ever assembled by human hands. The laboratory aboard New Haven Station hummed with energy as dozens of scientists worked around the clock to unlock the secrets of the ancient artifacts recovered from New Olympus. The station itself was a marvel of human engineering and desperation. Built from salvaged alien technology and pure human ingenuity, it floated in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter like a metallic flower blooming in the darkness of space. Its rotating sections provided gravity for the millions of displaced colonists who now called it home, while its research facilities pushed the boundaries of human knowledge further than ever before. Marcus ran his hand through his graying hair as he studied the data streams flowing across his workstation. The crystalline devices Elena had discovered were proving to be more extraordinary than anyone had imagined. They were not just ancient technology, but something far more profound. They were keys to understanding the fundamental structure of space and time itself. Dr. Webb called his assistant, Dr. Sarah Kim, from across the laboratory. We're getting resonance patterns from device number 7. The energy output is stabilizing. Marcus hurried over to her station and watched the displays with growing excitement. For months, they had been trying to activate the ancient devices safely. Each attempt had ended in failure, with energy spikes that threatened to destroy the entire laboratory. But this time was different. This time, the device was responding to their commands. The crystalline artifact began to glow brighter, and suddenly the space around it seemed to bend. Marcus felt his stomach lurch as gravity fluctuated, and for a moment he could swear he saw through the walls of the station to the stars beyond. Shut it down, he ordered quickly. Sarah's hands flew over the controls, and the strange effects ceased immediately. But the implications of what they had just witnessed were staggering. Marcus, Sarah whispered, staring at the readings on her screen. Those energy patterns. They're identical to hyperspace field signatures, but the power requirements are 90% lower than anything in Confederation technology. Marcus nodded grimly. He had suspected as much. The ancient civilization that created these devices had mastered space-time manipulation in ways that made current galactic technology look primitive. If humanity could learn to harness this power, they would possess capabilities far beyond anything the Confederation had ever imagined. Meanwhile, in the construction bays of New Haven Station, Commander Kate Sullivan oversaw the building of humanity's new fleet. The ships taking shape in the massive zero-gravity foundries looked nothing like the sleek vessels of the Galactic Confederation. They were angular and functional, built for durability rather than beauty. Kate walked along the skeletal framework of the newest cruiser, watching human workers in pressure suits weld armor plating and install weapon systems. Every component had been designed and built by human hands using human materials. No alien technology, no foreign dependencies. These ships would be completely independent of galactic infrastructure. Commander, her chief engineer, Tony Rodriguez, approached with a tablet full of specifications. The new reactor designs are exceeding expectations. We're getting 40% more power output than the old alien fusion systems, and they're more stable too. Kate smiled. Human engineers had always been frustrated by the limitations of Confederation technology. The aliens built their systems to be safe and standardized, but they were also inefficient and inflexible. Given the freedom to innovate, human designers were creating solutions that were both more powerful and more reliable. What about the weapon systems? Kate asked. Even better news there, Tony replied. The magnetic acceleration cannons are ready for testing. They use principles we learned from the ancient artifacts to accelerate projectiles to near light speed. A single shot can punch through any known armor. Kate nodded with satisfaction. The aliens had always looked down on human military technology as crude and primitive. They preferred energy weapons that looked impressive but were limited by power constraints. Human kinetic weapons might be simple, but they were devastatingly effective. On Luna, General Chris Adams was developing military doctrines that would have shocked the peaceful Confederation. Cut off from galactic peacekeeping forces, humanity had been forced to confront the possibility of defending themselves against hostile alien powers. The result was a military philosophy, unlike anything the galaxy had seen. Chris stood in the main briefing room of Lunar Command, addressing a room full of senior officers. Behind him, holographic displays showed fleet formations and tactical scenarios that emphasized speed, adaptability, and the element of surprise. The aliens think in terms of set-piece battles and formal engagements, Chris explained to his audience. They have protocols for everything, established procedures that have not changed in centuries. That is their weakness. He gestured to the displays, which showed human ships using unconventional tactics to outmaneuver larger alien fleets. We will not fight their kind of war. We will hit fast, strike hard, and disappear before they can respond. We will use their predictability against them. The officers nodded in understanding. Many of them were veterans of colonial defense forces who had chafed under Confederation restrictions on military development. Now they were free to explore tactics and strategies that had been forbidden during humanity's time in galactic society. But the most important breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Dr. Lavra Mitchell had been working on theoretical physics before the Exiled, studying the mathematical foundations of hyperspace travel. With access to the ancient artifacts and freedom from Confederation oversight, she had been pursuing research that alien scientists would have considered impossible. Lavra stood in her private laboratory deep within New Haven Station, watching her latest experiment with barely contained excitement. Before her sat a device no larger than a briefcase, humming with barely audible energy. It looked nothing like the massive hyperspace drives used by Confederation ships, but the readings on her instruments were unmistakable. Computer, initiate. Test sequence 7, she commanded. The device activated, and space around it began to ripple. Laura felt the familiar sensation of hyperspace field generation, but something was different. The field was smaller, more focused, and incredibly more efficient than anything she had ever seen. Test successful, the computer announced. Hyperspace field generated with 93% efficiency. No external beacon synchronization required. Lavra sat down heavily in her chair, overwhelmed by the implications of what she had just accomplished. She had created a hyperspace drive that was completely independent of alien infrastructure. More than that, she had created a drive that was faster and more efficient than anything the Confederation possessed. She reached for her communicator with shaking hands. Admiral Carter needed to know about this immediately. But first, Lavra allowed herself a moment to savor the achievement. For 3 years, humanity had been working in isolation, cut off from the technologies they had grown dependent on. The aliens expected them to struggle, to eventually come crawling back, begging for readmission to galactic society. Instead, humanity had done what they did best. They had adapted, innovated, and overcome. They had turned their exile into an opportunity to develop capabilities that would have been impossible under Confederation oversight. Word of Laura's breakthrough spread through New Haven Station like wildfire. In the research laboratories, scientists cheered and embraced each other. In the construction bays, workers welded with renewed enthusiasm, knowing that their ships would soon have drives superior to anything in the galaxy. In the command centers, military officers smiled grimly as they realized the strategic implications of independent hyperspace capability. Admiral Carter received the news in her private office, surrounded by star charts and tactical assessments. She had been planning for the day when humanity would emerge from exile, but she had expected it to take decades. Laura's breakthrough had just accelerated that timeline dramatically. "How soon can we begin production?" Carter asked the assembled team of scientists and engineers. "The first prototype drives will be ready for installation within 6 months," Marcus replied. "Full production can begin within a year." Carter nodded, her mind already racing with possibilities. Humanity had spent 3 years in forced isolation, rebuilding their strength and developing new capabilities. The time for hiding was almost over. She looked around the room at the faces of the people who had made this miracle possible. Scientists who had unlocked the secrets of ancient technology. Engineers who had built ships superior to anything in the Confederation fleet. Military officers who had developed tactics that would revolutionize space warfare. 3 years ago, the aliens had cast humanity out of galactic society, expecting them to learn humility and conformity. Instead, they had created something unprecedented, a human civilization free from alien oversight and limitations, armed with technology that surpassed anything the galaxy had ever seen. Carter allowed herself a small smile as she looked out at the stars beyond the station's viewport. Soon, humanity would return to the galaxy. 15 years had passed since humanity's exile began, and Captain Alex Turner stood on the bridge of the Earth Ascendant as it emerged from hyperspace into an unexplored star system. The ship was a masterpiece of human engineering, sleek but functional, equipped with the revolutionary drive technology that had made this journey possible. Around him, his crew worked with quiet efficiency at stations displaying star charts that no alien had ever seen. Captain, his navigation officer, Lieutenant Sam Chun, called out from his console. "We're detecting multiple planetary bodies in the habitable zone. Initial scans show 3 worlds with Earth-compatible atmospheres." Alex nodded, trying to contain his excitement. This was the 15th system they had explored in the past 6 months, and each discovery had been more promising than the last. The galaxy was far larger and more hospitable than the Confederation had ever admitted. Entire regions of space that alien surveys had dismissed as empty or unsuitable were actually teeming with worlds perfect for human habitation. "Begin detailed planetary surveys," Alex ordered, "and send a message back to command. Tell them we've found another garden of Eden out here." The discovery was part of a larger pattern that was reshaping humanity's understanding of the galaxy. Using their advanced hyperspace drives, human exploration vessels were reaching sectors that had been inaccessible under the old Confederation beacon system. What they found challenged everything they had been told about galactic geography and AGI. The distribution of habitable worlds. Dr. Rebecca Stone, The mission's chief scientist approached Alex with a data tablet in her hands. Her expression was troubled, and Alex could see why when he looked at her findings. The survey data showed clear evidence of ancient settlements on 2 of the 3 worlds, ruins that matched the architectural style of the artifacts found on New Olympus. Captain, I think we need to consider the possibility that the Confederation has been deliberately hiding these systems, Rebecca said quietly. The energy signatures we're detecting suggest these worlds were once part of a vast interstellar civilization, one that predates anything in galactic records. Alex studied the data with growing amazement. If Rebecca was right, then humanity had stumbled upon evidence of a lost empire that had once spanned thousands of star systems. More importantly, the Confederation had known about it and chosen to keep it secret from younger species like humanity. How many more systems like this do you think are out there? Alex asked. Based on the pattern of ruins and the hyperspace routes we've been mapping, I estimate there could be hundreds, maybe thousands of habitable worlds that the Confederation has kept off limits, Rebecca replied. Captain, I think we've discovered why they were so eager to exile us. They were afraid we would find all of this. Meanwhile, in the Kepler region, Commander Diana Walsh was overseeing the construction of New Terra, humanity's first major colony since their return to space. The world was everything the colonists could have hoped for. Vast continents with fertile soil, clean oceans teeming with life, and a stable climate that required minimal TERRFORMING. Diana stood on the observation deck of the orbital construction platform, watching as the first permanent settlements took shape on the planet's surface. Below her, thousands of colonists worked to build a civilization that would be purely human in design and purpose. No alien oversight, no Confederation regulations, just human ingenuity applied to the challenge of making a new world home. Commander. Her deputy, Captain Mike Torres, joined her at the viewport. The industrial complexes are ahead of schedule. We'll be completely self-sufficient within 18 months. Diana smiled with satisfaction. New Terra was not just another colony, but a proof of concept. It demonstrated that humanity could build thriving worlds without alien technology or guidance. The colonists were using techniques learned during the dark years after exile, combining ancient knowledge recovered from the ruins with purely human innovation. The results were impressive. New Terra cities were more efficient than anything humanity had built under Confederation oversight. The agricultural systems produced higher yields with less environmental impact. The manufacturing facilities created goods that surpassed galactic standards for quality and durability. But most importantly, New Terra was free. Its government answered to no alien authority. Its people pursued their own dreams and ambitions without interference from galactic bureaucrats. It was humanity as it was meant to be, independent, innovative, and unlimited by the fears and prejudices of older civilizations. Word of humanity's expansion was beginning to reach the edges of Confederation space through neutral trading posts and independent merchants. The reports were met with disbelief at first, then growing concern as more evidence accumulated. Human ships were appearing at the fringes of known space, offering goods and technologies that seemed impossibly advanced for a species that had been exiled only 15 years earlier. On the neutral station Deep Space Nine, alien traders gathered in cantinas and marketplaces to discuss the strange new developments. A Zephyrian merchant named Coulter examined a piece of human technology with growing amazement. The device was a simple communicator, but its range and clarity surpassed anything in Confederation inventories. Where did you acquire this? Coulter asked the human trader across from him. The human, a woman named Janet Brooks, smiled mysteriously. We make them ourselves now. Would you like to see our latest fusion reactor designs? They're quite impressive. Coulter S. Crystalline skin flickered with patterns of confusion and concern. The humans were supposed to be struggling in exile, slowly learning the harsh lessons of independence. Instead, they seemed to be thriving beyond anything the Confederation had thought possible. Similar conversations were taking place throughout the galaxy as evidence mounted that humanity had not only survived their exile, but somehow emerged stronger than ever. Independent observers reported human colonies in regions that Confederation surveys had declared uninhabitable. Neutral merchants spoke of human technologies that outperformed anything available through official galactic trade networks. The implications were staggering. If humanity could develop such capabilities in isolation, what did that say about the Confederation's claims of technological and cultural superiority? More troubling still, what did it say about the necessity of the rigid control systems that had governed galactic society for millennia? President Helen Carter, Lisa's daughter who had inherited her mother's position in the Earth government, stood before the assembled representatives of the United Colonies of Humanity. The meeting was taking place on New Haven Station, which had grown from a refugee camp into the bustling capital of a new human civilization. "Fellow humans," Helen began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber, and to the 63 worlds that now flew the banner of human independence. 15 years ago, the Galactic Confederation cast us out because they feared our potential. They believed that isolation would humble us, that hardship would teach us to conform to their vision of civilized behavior. She paused, looking out at the faces of colonists, scientists, military officers, and ordinary citizens who had built something extraordinary from the ashes of exile. Today, we stand as proof that they were wrong. We have not been humbled. We have been liberated. Free from their restrictions, we have achieved things they claimed were impossible. Free from their oversight, we have built a civilization that surpasses anything they ever offered us. The chamber erupted in applause, but Helen raised her hand for silence. She was not finished. They cast us out because they feared our potential. Today, we show them they were right to be afraid. Not because we seek conquest, but because we represent something they cannot understand, the power of free beings to exceed all expectations. Her words were broadcast to every human world, reaching millions of people who had transformed from refugees into pioneers in the space of a single generation. They were heard by scientists who had unlocked the secrets of ancient technology, by engineers who had built fleets superior to anything in the galaxy, by colonists who had carved thriving civilizations from empty worlds. But Helen's speech was also intercepted by Confederation monitoring stations scattered throughout the galaxy. In the crystal spires of Zephyria Prime, Chancellor Vextar listened to the human leader's words with growing unease. The patterns of light beneath his skin shifted to colors that indicated deep concern and barely controlled fear. For the first time in galactic history, the ancient powers that had ruled the stars for millennia found themselves facing something they had never encountered before. A younger species that had not only refused to submit to their authority, but had somehow exceeded their capabilities. While doing so, reports coming in from the galactic rim painted a picture that challenged everything the Confederation believed about the natural order of things. Humanity was not struggling in exile. They were thriving. They were expanding. They were building an empire that operated by rules. The ancient powers did not understand and could not control as Helen's speech concluded, and the human representatives returned to their respective worlds. The galaxy held its breath. The exile that was meant to be a punishment had become something unprecedented, the birth of a new galactic power. 25 years had passed since humanity's exile, and Admiral Peter Grant stood on the bridge of the Terran flagship, New Earth, as it led the largest fleet in galactic history through hyperspace toward the Alterian system. Behind him stretched a formation of over 2,000 human vessels, each one representing the pinnacle of human engineering and the determination of a species that had refused to be broken by exile. The crisis had begun 3 months earlier when the insectoid hive mind collective launched a massive expansion into neutral space. Their warrior drones swept across star system after star system, enslaving primitive species and strip mining entire worlds for resources. The ancient Zephyrians, too proud to admit they needed help, watched helplessly as their carefully maintained galactic order crumbled before the collective's relentless advance. Peter studied the tactical displays showing the Alterian system under siege. The gentle, peaceful Alterians had been among the few alien species to speak out against humanity's exile decades earlier. Now they faced extinction as hive mind drones overran their homeworld, turning their crystal cities into resource extraction sites. Admiral, his communications officer, called out, "We're receiving a transmission from the Alterian government. They're requesting immediate assistance." Peter nodded grimly. The message had taken weeks to reach human space through hidden hyperspace routes, and by now the situation would be even more desperate. But help was coming, and it would arrive in a form the galaxy had never seen before. "Signal the fleet," Peter ordered. "All ships prepare for combat operations. Remember, we're not here for conquest. We're here to protect those who cannot protect themselves." The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Alterian system, and what they found there shocked even veterans who had fought in the colonial border conflicts. Hive mind ships swarmed around Alteria Prime like metallic insects, their organic hulls pulsing with biomechanical energy. On the planet's surface, massive extraction machines carved deep wounds into the landscape while Alterian refugees fled in terror. But the collective had never faced an enemy like humanity. As the human fleet moved into attack formation, their ships deployed weapons and tactics that the insectoid minds could not comprehend. Magnetic acceleration cannons fired projectiles at near light speed, punching through hive mind armor like paper. Quantum torpedoes created localized space-time distortions that tore enemy vessels apart at the molecular level. Captain Michelle Torres commanded the rescue operations from her cruiser Liberty. Her ships moved through the chaos of battle with surgical precision, evacuating Alterian civilians while human fighters engaged the collective's warrior drones. The contrast could not have been more stark. Where the hive mind sought only to consume and destroy, humanity fought to protect and preserve. "Captain," her tactical officer reported, "the collective fleet is retreating. They're abandoning the system." Michelle watched the insectoid ships flee toward deep space, their biomechanical minds unable to process the devastating defeat they had suffered. In less than 6 hours, humanity had accomplished what the Confederation had failed to do in months of deliberation and debate. Dr. Benjamin Clark, now director of the Human Diplomatic Corps, arrived in the Alterian system aboard a hospital ship. 3 days after the battle, the sight that greeted him was both heartbreaking and inspiring. Alterian cities lay in ruins, their crystal spires shattered and their gardens turned to ash. But among the rubble, human medical teams worked alongside Alterian survivors to treat the wounded and rebuild what had been destroyed. Director Clark, an Alterian elder, approached him as he toured the refugee camps. The alien's large eyes showed gratitude and wonder in equal measure. "Your people have saved us when no one else would act. How can we ever repay such kindness?" Benjamin smiled gently. "You don't need to repay anything. This is what civilized beings do for each other. We protect those who need protection, regardless of species or politics." The elder's eyes widened with understanding. "This is why the Confederation feared you, not because you would conquer, but because you would show them what they had become." Word of humanity's intervention in the Alterian crisis spread throughout the galaxy like wildfire. On dozens of worlds, species that had been abandoned by Confederation indifference began to look toward human space with hope. If humanity would fight to protect the Alterians, Perhaps they would help others who faced similar threats. The response from the Confederation leadership was swift and predictable. On Zephyria Prime, Chancellor Vextar convened an emergency session of the High Council. The same chamber where humanity had been sentenced to exile now buzzed with panicked discussions about the human problem that refused to go away. "They have violated the terms of their exile," the Chancellor declared, his crystalline skin pulsing with agitated light patterns. "They have interfered in galactic affairs without authorization. They have deployed military forces outside their assigned territory." But the other council members were no longer listening with the same confidence they had shown 25 years earlier. Reports from the Alterian system described human technology that surpassed anything in Confederation. Inventories. Intelligence sources spoke of a human empire spanning over 200 worlds, connected by hyperspace networks that operated independently of galactic infrastructure. Most troubling of all were the refugees. Beings from a dozen different species had begun fleeing Confederation space to seek asylum in human territory. They spoke of freedom, opportunity, and protection that their own governments could not provide. The humans welcomed them all, offering citizenship to anyone willing to embrace the principles of individual liberty and mutual cooperation. The crisis reached its peak when the Hive Mind Collective, humiliated by their defeat at Alteria, launched a massive assault on the Confederation's core worlds. Their bioships appeared without warning in the Zephyrian home system, intent on destroying the crystal cities that had stood for millennia. Chancellor Vextar found himself in the unprecedented position of sending a message to the humans who had once stood before him as defendants. The irony was not lost on anyone involved, as the proud Zephyrian leader formally requested assistance from the species he had exiled in disgrace. The human response came not from Admiral Grant or President Carter, but from Dr. Benjamin Clark, speaking on behalf of the newly formed Terran Federation. His message was brief and to the point. "We will defend any peaceful species against aggression, regardless of past conflicts. Help is on the way." The Battle of Zephyria Prime became legend throughout the galaxy. Human fleets arrived just as collective bioships began their bombardment of the crystal cities. The engagement that followed demonstrated the full extent of human technological advancement and tactical innovation. Hive mind vessels that had terrorized the galaxy for months were systematically destroyed by weapons and strategies the insectoid minds could not counter. But the real victory came in the aftermath, as Zephyrian civilians emerged from their shelters. To survey the damage, they found human medics treating their wounded and human engineers working to repair their infrastructure. The species that had been cast out as barbarians were now protecting the very beings who had rejected them. Standing in the ruins of the High Council chamber, Chancellor Vextar faced Admiral Grant as equals for the first time. The crystalline being's patterns showed something that had never been seen before in Zephyrian psychology: humility. "Admiral Grant," the Chancellor said through his translation device, "the Confederation owes humanity a debt that can never be repaid. We were wrong to exile your species. We were wrong about everything." Grant's response would be remembered throughout galactic history. "You didn't exile us, Chancellor. You freed us. You gave us the chance to become what we were always meant to be. For that, we should thank you." The formal establishment of the Terran Federation came 6 months later, ratified by representatives from over 300 worlds. The ceremony took place on New Earth, humanity's new capital world, with delegates from species that had never dreamed of participating in galactic governance. The Federation's charter was simple, but revolutionary. All sentient beings had the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. No species would be enslaved, no world would be strip-mined, and no government would rule without the consent of the governed. It was a radical departure from the hierarchical control systems that had dominated the galaxy for millennia. As the ceremony concluded, Admiral Grant looked out at the assembled delegates and thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. 25 years earlier, humanity had been cast out as unfit for galactic society. Today, they were leading the creation of a new kind of galactic society, one based on freedom rather than control, cooperation rather than domination. The final scene took place in the gardens of New Earth's capital city, where children from dozens of different species played together under an alien sun. Above them, ships bearing the insignia of the Terran Federation prepared to depart for the furthest reaches of space, carrying explorers, scientists, and peacekeepers who would ensure that no species would ever again face the darkness alone.